I'm going to start off just meddling. We're just going to I'm not going to have a cute little story. I'm just going to meddle right from the get-go by just simply having each of us ask ourselves the question, how do you spend your time? And right there, people are already going, oh, geez, I should have stayed home. Okay, how do you spend your time? And I don't know if you ever have those moments where you just think to yourself, gee, I wish the days were longer. I wish there were more hours in the day. Ever been there? Where you're like, man, I wish there were more hours in the day. I wish there was more time. I just don't have enough, okay? Because here's why. Let me break it down for you what happens. Because this is just going to be your typical person within the United States. Your spouse wants about, on average, 20% of your time, but your boss wants 40 to 60% of your time. Think about it, 9 hours or 10 hours a day at work, okay? So 40 to 60%. Your kids want 15% of your time. The church usually wants 30% of your time, all crammed into Saturday and Sunday. Right? And then if you're in school, they want 40% of your time. And so what you have here is a real big problem, because if you were to start adding up these numbers, what do you get? Over 100%. Yeah, you get over. Then you get friends into the picture to throw an extra 10% on there. And this number is set up right here is 155 to 175%. And here's the problem. We only have 100% to give. There is no 110. I know people say, give 110% of your dedication. There is no 110. You can't give more than 100% because you don't got more. If you had more, then you would have been given 90 to begin with. Okay, so once you give every second of every day, that's 100%. But when you look at everything, if your boss wants 40 and your spouse wants 20, right there's 60. And then if your church wants 30, that's 90. Now you don't have room for all of your kids. You don't have room for all your friends. You don't have room for house chores. You don't got room for banking, accounting, cleaning, shopping. You don't have time for any of that. Okay, you don't have time for sleeping in there, which, by the way, is like, 40% of your time. And so on and on it goes, okay? So there's a real problem here. And then, oh, by the way, where's like Bible study and ministry and giving and serving and helping? And then we wonder why we have those phrases that come into our head. Why does the catastrophe have to come now? Can't it come when it's more convenient? And the reason that it's a catastrophe is because it's not convenient. The problem is there is no convenient time, okay? Because we have no time. Because life seems to want 155 to 175%, which means then that we need to find a way to cut out a third of our busyness. Think about that. 150% to get down to 100 means you have to cut out almost like a third of your life in order to get it there. Okay, you have to cut that much out. And wouldn't it be nice to know that you could take a third of your busyness and stresses and just delete it? Wouldn't that be like, oh, that would be like a dream. But the problem is we're all addicted to being busy. So if we cut a third out, know what we would do? Replace it with a half. More than a third, and be more busy than when we started. Or we say, I cut stuff out because I wasn't doing anything anyway, so it made time for something else. But if you cut something out that you weren't doing anything with anyways, you didn't cut anything out. And then if you got more busy with something new, you've really just added. So you deleted 0%, you just deleted title, so like maybe 0.001, whoopee. And then you added like 20% with the new whatever you're working on, new hobby or whatever. So then you made yourself busier. Then you start wondering, why do I feel so busy when I just cut stuff out of my life? Yeah, because you cut stuff you weren't even doing. Okay, so there's a problem. So we got to find a way to be able to look at good things, good opportunities, good requests, good opportunities and say no to those. But then we say, well, yeah, that sounds easy. But what happens is comes the manipulation when you say no. Because I'll tell you what, each area does not appreciate the other areas exist. They don't. School doesn't care that you have a job. Your job doesn't care you have a church. And the church doesn't care you have a family. And so on and on it seems to go. I know that sounds rude and horrible and mean, but when you're working Monday through Friday and then you're in church all day Sunday, and Saturday's the only day you got with your family, but yet what's the day that they're predominantly busy for the average church in the United States to do ministry? Saturdays. Okay, so you see where it just all comes into a big messy collision. And then when you say no, comes the manipulation. You're like, well, what would Jesus do? He wouldn't say no. Oh, yes, actually, he would. But we don't think like that, because we don't pay attention to the verses where it said that Jesus abandoned the crowds and left them still sick and still wandering and wondering, and that they had to follow him, and he had to get in a boat and cross the sea. And then the people went around the sea and kept following him. So then he went up a mountain that everybody looked at it and went, forget it. He's serious. I'm not going up that. Okay, so there were times where Jesus got away, but our parts of life don't want to let us get away. And they start manipulating us. Well, it's family. You should do it for family. I get that a lot. People say, can you do this for me? I'll be like, actually, no. Well, why? What's so important that you don't have time for family? I'm like, I make time for family all the time. We're talking right now. And I'm just not doing that because that's going to take more time than I have to get. Really? What do you have going on in your life that's so busy? Well, guess what, Mom? I don't have to answer that question to you because it's none of your business. No, but, and then you wonder why I limp. But, no. But that's what happened. And then the same thing in the church. If we say, hey, we're doing activities, show up. Somebody doesn't show up. People start grumbling about that person who are actually present. Why couldn't they show up? Surely they had nothing better to do. We do 3 things a year and they can't show up we gave them months notice and they can't show up, and people start griping. Why gripe? They just simply chose what might have been the best choice. We don't know because we're not in their life. And so this is that battle, the battle of that 155 to 175% of trying to have more time than what we are even given. Okay, so what do we do about this, and how do we better handle that? How did Paul do this? Because Paul seems like a guy who has all the time in the world. I see him doing so much, and he's going so many places. I'm thinking, I don't even have time to get to the store. How in the world did he have time to travel to so many countries? And it's amazing. And we might want to try to slough it off as saying, well, that's just Eastern culture and ancient Mesopotamia. Or we might try to slough it off to say, well, things were simpler back then. We have technology now, which got rid of half the stuff we had to wait on for doing. But yet somehow we got busier. And so that doesn't seem to be the answer. So what's going on? So I'd like for us to kind of go, Acts 18, speak to me. That's what I would like. And for us to try to figure out something to help bring sanity to our crazy, insane lives. And so we're going to look at this. Acts chapter 18. We're committed verse by verse through books of the Bible. We're working our way through Acts, have been for a long time, right? It's been over a year, and we're in this one book, and we're having a great time, right? Because we're hitting some awesome topics we wouldn't normally cover, because we're hitting passages that most people wouldn't preach on. Like today's, the dominant verses we're going to be looking at is Paul going to this city, to that city, to this country, to that country, to this country, to that country. And it gives us no narrative with it other than he traveled. And we're going to spend a lot of our time on those verses. Isn't that great? It's like those list of names, how sometimes those are the most interesting of discussions. Well, here comes a list of cities and countries, and it's going to be a really fun, hopefully, discussion, and not a waste of your also valuable time. Okay, so here we go. Acts chapter 18. What's going to happen is Paul is currently at Corinth still, and God had already given him a vision. Have boldness, speak, don't be silent, and don't worry, you're not going to get, your butt kicked during the next little while. It's going to be fine. I got people here in this city. You're not going to get beat up. And so that's kind of Paul's, because he's gone from area to area getting beat up, imprisoned over and over again. So it's nice for him to go into a city with fear and trembling and then go, thank you, Lord, a reprieve. And then an attack happens after about a year and a half. So an attack takes place at Corinth, and now Paul's going to start getting nervous. Here's what happens, verse 12 to 13, and moving on a little further. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack against Paul and brought him to the judge's bench. That's Gallio. This man, they said, persuades people to worship God contrary to the law. As Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio spoke and said to the Jews, if it were a matter of crime or moral evil, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you Jews. But if these are questions about words, names, and your own law, see to it yourselves. I don't want to be a judge of such things. So he drove them from the judge's bench. Then they all seized Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the judge's bench. But none of these things concerned Gallio. We're going to pause here for a moment. There's some interesting things to unpack here. First off, Gallio is this judge that the Jews bring him all to. And the Jews are bring an accusation, a kind of a legal type of accusation against Paul. So they bring it to the judge. Judge, we have a problem. If I were to make this into a movie, and someday I want to make a fun Paul movie, I would make this part a musical. It would just cut into song, something like from Queen. And it would go something like, Gallio, Gallio, please make him go. And then they'd break off into two different choir groups. But he won't go, please make him go. But he won't go, please make him go, Gallio. Okay, would be fun, right? Okay, maybe not. A little Wayne's World moment. Come on, it'd be great. Then some headbanging afterwards, and it would be a great time. But nonetheless, so they're saying, we have a problem. We have a problem with this Paul guy. What they did not expect was that Gallio was anti-Semitic, that he hated Jews, that he was, the Mel Gibson of the New Testament, that he was, this guy that did not like Jews, okay? He has anti-Semitic problems. So he's like, I have a hard time even putting up with you people, and now you're wasting my time. Get out of here. And he just doesn't say leave. He drives them out. To drive someone out implies he gets the lynchers with the sticks and starts beating all of them away from his bench. Okay, so he's like, get out of here. Bailiff, get them out. And the bailiff's rough. Police brutality of the extreme degree. Just whap, 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 get out of here. And then getting them away from the bench. So then the Jews get all mad at the new synagogue ruler. Because remember, Crispus was the old synagogue ruler that became a Christian and then left. So that meant Sosthenes has to take over. So Sosthenes then goes, man, this was not a good idea. This really backfired because I thought we could get rid of Paul, but we all got a whooping. And so then they said, you're right, Sosthenes. This is your fault. So they start beating him. And so now you got the bailiffs, the Roman lynchers, beating on Sosthenes, and then the Jews, while getting beat, start beating on Sosthenes. So this is like a Rumble Royal in the WWE. Okay, everyone's just in the ring beating on each other all at once. Meanwhile, the one person not getting beat is Paul. He's off to the side going, man, this is far out. This is like Keystone Cops, and he's Instagramming it, So this is just an interesting little moment. But Paul does realize that the violence is starting to increase. He realizes that it's starting to get worse. Maybe after a year and a half, it's time to leave Corinth. It's time to do ministry someplace else. Because once something like that escalates, it's not long until it's time to realize that, hey, God said he was going to protect me for a while. I don't know how long a while is because God did not give me his calendar. But I think a while is pretty much up, looking at this brawl in the courtroom. And Mr. Judge, while watching everybody beating on Sosthenes illegally, seems to not care because, it's just a Jew getting beat. What difference does it make? Okay, so this is this real big problem. So Paul decides it's time to leave. And as he gets ready to leave, he shaves his head. And one of the weirdest things Paul has ever done in all of his life recorded in Scripture. He has some amazing thing he's done that makes us scratch our head and we go, what on earth? But this is one of the weirdest things that he has done, and scholars have a hard time dealing with this. Acts chapter 18. So Paul, having stayed on for many days, said goodbye to the brothers and sailed away to Syria. Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He shaved his head at Cenchreae, and because he had taken a vow. That's all we know. And then it moves on from there, all the places that he traveled to. And people begin wondering, maybe Paul didn't shave his head. Maybe Aquila did. Because, after all, Priscilla and Aquila were with him, and he could point to Aquila, saying Aquila shaved his head. To which I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be more academic. That doesn't fit the grammar. Because check this out. What's the subject here? So Paul, having stayed on for many days, said goodbye to the brothers, sailed away to Syria. Priscilla and Aquila were with him. So the subject is still Paul. So then he shaved his head, so that he has to go to the most appropriate active subject that's there, which isn't Aquila. It's Paul. So as much because people are trying so hard, scholars and academics are trying so hard to remove Paul shaving his head, because Jesus had a verse that he said, do not take an oath and do not do this. So it seems like Paul's almost like in sin doing that, although Jesus' statement were more about abusing oaths and trying to manipulate God and trying to take an oath in order to control him, rather than saying just don't take vows whatsoever, because we all have no problems with the marital vow, for example. So it's not that Jesus was anti-vows, but that whole abusing of vows, trying to manipulate and control God, and to thinking we can put God to the test with our vows. I'm going to do this, well, God has to do this, and that's not quite how that works. So we find that Paul's actions are not a sinful action, but they are curious. Because first of all, shaving your head, that's interesting. What, did he join a bowling ball club and wanted to look like his, what is this all about? This is a very weird vow to be able to take. And it seems to be connected to the Nazaritic vow in Numbers. And people go, well, isn't that growing your hair out? Well, yeah, it was, until you grew it out long enough. Then you would shave your head, and then you would give your hair as a burnt offering as part of the Nazaritic vow. That would be part of that. So you would grow my hair out so I could shave it and then offer it as a burnt offering. And it's kind of like how some people will grow their hair out just to shave their head and give it to locks of love type of a deal. Okay, so that's a little bit of how this vow kind of worked. And so what appears to be is that Paul made that type of a vow, and where he does it at Cenchreae is right next to where Corinth was. It's actually right on the coast before he set sail. So he went to the city, and that's where he shaved his head as he was getting ready to get on the boat and head off. And so, in fact, here's a little bit of how his travels went here. So let me kind of bring up his travels, and we look at this. First, let's hit the whole thing of travels, then we'll come back to the whole head shaving thing. So I want you to see the whole picture of his traveling. So he leaves Corinth, goes to Cenchreae, shaves his head, gets on a boat, and he sails for where? Syria. Okay, but he makes a detour along the way. So Paul sailed away to Syria, verse 18, going into 19. When they reached Ephesus, he left them there. Who's them? Priscilla and Aquila. Okay, because now we got them referring to a secondary subject, and the last secondary subject we had were Priscilla and Aquila. Isn't grammar fun? Okay, it's important. Otherwise, you start finding out that Aquila shaved his head. And so you got to get the grammar right. So he went to Ephesus, left Priscilla and Aquila there, but he himself entered the synagogue and engaged in discussion with the Jews. Though they asked him to stay for a longer time, he declined. They said, please stay, preach with us more. He says, no. How good would it have been to have stayed and preached the gospel? Very good. Isn't preaching the gospel an awesome thing? Paul says, no, I preached enough, I'm going to go. So he declined, and he said goodbye and said, I'll come back to you again if God wills, and he set sail from Ephesus. Because where is he going? Syria. Okay, so on landing at Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church and went down to Antioch, and after spending some time there, he set out, traveling through one place after another in the Galatian territory and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So here's just a little glimpse of what this looked like. So let's kind of look at the area here. I'm going to give you more of a zoomed out map because we all know Italy. I know we're like geographically challenged, and so at least we all know Italy because Italy looks like a boot, okay? Now if you didn't know that, now you do, and you'll never forget. Okay, it looks like a boot, okay? It's almost like, I think that's why soccer is so popular. Or football, okay, it's so popular overseas, okay, but it looks like a boot. Now, where Paul is at is actually kind of in this region, because here's the Red Sea, here's where Israel is, here's where Syria is that Paul's sailing to. Paul is currently way over in this area, okay? This is Greece and the Macedonian area, and so let's kind of zoom in. This is the Mediterranean Sea. We're going to zoom in to here, okay? So that way, see, there's the island here, and now there's that island, okay? So you see where we're at? So Italy's up over here. The Red Sea's going, peace, dude. Okay, so we got everything kind of, you see where we are? Now, let me kind of give you some spots on the map so we can see Paul's travels here. So there's Corinth, roughly thereabout. The dot is not in proportionate size of the city. Okay, but I wanted you to be able to see it. I know we have people that glasses, even still, they're doing this. And so I wanted you to be able to see it. So Corinth, and then we have Cenchreae. That's where Paul okay, decided to shave his head. So that's right here on the coastline, right in that little niche right there. That's where Paul shaves his head and gets on the boat and sets sail. As he's setting sail, he doesn't just go all the way to Syria. No. He makes a subtle little detour, first going to Ephesus. That's where he drops off Priscilla and Aquila. So they get to Ephesus, Priscilla and Aquila. Come to find out, Priscilla apparently gets seasick easy, and after lots of barfing and not looking dignified, actually that's not what happened, but I would imagine that's what it would be like. And so after she's like, oh, I'm not making a womanly example of myself, they decide we're staying in Ephesus. And so they stayed in Ephesus, and then Paul from Ephesus then likely either made a couple little stops along the way, but at some point or another made his way all the way down to Caesarea. Okay, now, if you are shaving your head and you are going to want to do a vow of the Nazaritic vow, which means you have to offer your hair as a burnt offering on the altar of the Lord is where? Jerusalem. Okay. Oh, by the way, there's Jerusalem. Okay, and why was he wanting to go to Syria? I wonder. How close is it to Jerusalem? Okay, so if you're going to do that, first you shave your head, you take your hair, and you put it in a bag. Okay, so there's Paul walking around. That's going to smell nice. Okay, so there's Paul walking around with his bag of hair that he has, and that's what you would do. You would save it for later, because that's when he made the vow. You made the vow, vroom, and then you would offer the burnt offering when you get to the temple. So he finally made it to Caesarea. Then the text says that he went where? To Jerusalem. Or where? To the church, actually, is what he says. The text says that he went up to the church. That's interesting. Jerusalem's where? South. So then people say, well, clearly it wasn't Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is south, and the text says clearly that Paul went up. To which I say that's not what it's saying. And people go, why? Is there some weird Greek word that really means down when it says up? No, Jerusalem is actually called always going up to Jerusalem, no matter what direction you come from. You don't say over, you don't say down. No matter where you are, you say up, because it's on a hill. And it's a holy place. And so you ascend to it. So it's always the phrase going up. So when you're in Caesarea, then he went up to the church. Okay, so that's a simple statement that probably and likely means that he went up to Jerusalem and went to the church there to say hi. While he was there, he offered his hair as a sacrifice. But notice that it doesn't say all those words. It's like we have a lot of silence that's going on here. And so people then argue, well, there's a lot of absence here. And so therefore, obviously, that's not what happened. Well, here's the thing, though. It's the only thing that makes sense of Paul shaving his head for a vow, because it's the only vow shaving head that there is. And then for Paul to travel from here all the way across the sea to there for only real seemingly purpose would be to eventually get to Jerusalem. So therefore, if that's what happened, why on earth did Luke, who is writing the book of Acts, write it in such a weird way? And first, people are like, I know. First, Luke is trying to abbreviate this because it's not the point. The vow is not the point. Luke is not wanting to focus on the vow. Luke is wanting to focus on Paul's missionary journey and where he's going. That's the focus. Why mention it then at all? Well, first, because it's weird. But second, he mentions it because Paul had just said, I am through with you Jews. I'm taking myself to the Gentiles now. So a reader can easily begin to think Paul is now anti-Jew anything. And Paul himself is a Jew. Okay, so what we get here is the very next big detail about Paul after that whole explosion, other than the Gallio moment. What we got is Paul taking on a Jewish vow. For that Luke is trying to let his readers know, Paul is not against Jewish tradition. He's not against Jews. He's not against the Old Testament, anything. Paul is still a faithful Jew as well as a Christ follower. Paul is still doing that. He is still going to this area. And so, but yet Luke also wants to emphasize not Judaism, but Christianity. So rather than going all about the temple, which by the way, Jesus said is not needed because Jesus is like the ultimate of the sacrifice and everything. So let's mention the church, because that's the focus now, but yet Paul is also not anti-Jew, and he's still following his Jewish traditions. And so there's a real mess that's going on to try to balance that out. And so Luke is just saying, here this all is. And to be honest with you, we're like a couple thousand years removed from this. So we read it and we go, what on earth is going on? Then when we start unpacking it, we go, really? There's so much, really? And it's like the original readers would have been like, oh yeah, that's what happened. It would have been so easy for them, but we struggle with it because we're so far removed. So we have to kind of sit back, think kind of Middle Eastern a little bit, and try to deal with some of what's going on there. So that's what is taking place. Isn't that amazing? So Paul, along the way, and then of course he ends up going on to Antioch, and he goes on to various places, and so on and on and on it goes. I won't give you all of that. Most Bibles have maps that will continue on the journey that he has. So the point is, Paul is doing a travel. He has a goal, right? And that goal is to get to Syria, which seems then to also imply that his ultimate goal is get to where? Jerusalem, to make that sacrifice of his hair, because he shaved his head, and you don't want to hang on to that hair for too long because it smells funky. And after a while, it gets, to the point it just walks on its own. And so you just don't want to hang on to that for very long. Okay, so while Paul is traveling all over the place, what we find out is that he is ministering along the way. Do you notice that? Not only does he dropping people off at a city that seems to be a little bit out of the way, but he's also traveling to this place, and he's going to the church there and debating with Jews there and leading them to the Lord there and just talking with them. Then he goes on to where he's finally getting to, and while he's there, he hits a few other areas and travels around before he goes on another missionary journey. Okay, and so it's neat that Paul is a guy with a goal that seems to embrace interruptions to his goal. He seems to be the guy that has time being flexible in that way. And here's the thing, I want us to kind of just begin to try to unpack this a little bit, is that we are in a sense like Paul. We all have goals. Okay, every single one of us have goals of some form or another, and I've taken a moment to try my best to personally break these down into 4 generic categories with a P and L type alliteration because, I have no life, and that's fun for me. And so my thesaurus is my second best friend right after my wife. And so, isn't that great to know that you rate higher than a thesaurus? That's all. It should be encouraging, okay? And so we all have goals that go into 4 categories. The first one I would call physical goals, which are about location. Okay, so physical goals that are about location. And that means that we have a goal to get somewhere, to get to a grocery store, to get to a movie, to get to the bank, to whatever the case is. So it's like we have location goals that are in life. We also have what could be called priority goals or love goals, if you will. And these would be like dirty dishes. Wait a minute, we don't love dirty dishes. What we do love, though, is having things have its place, and every place having its thing. We do love having things clean versus dirty. We don't love doing chores, but we love it when the chores are done. So this is a love type priority, but because that's making me a little nervous and antsy, and so I'll switch this because it's also about, we have our family and kids, and I love playing with my family. This is us playing out in the snow when we were having snow, if I remember right, but we were outside and having a good time, and so we these are our priority goals, our loves goals, okay, where we're having that type of a direction. Then we have psychological goals. Psychological goals are goals about longings, and that would be mostly about whatever it is that defines safety and security for us. Okay, so it's these psychological goals or longings, and it's our pursuits of safety and security. And then that brings us to our philosophical goals or long-term goals. And our philosophical goals would be like trying to lose weight, or trying to get rid of those annoying last 20 pounds, or for some people, trying to get rid of the first of that first 20. I went on a diet and gained 4 pounds, and so whatever the case is, but we have those long-term goals, whether it's a project to be completed or to graduate or whatever the case is. Okay, so I think that these are good ways of trying to break down the different goals we have in life into simple 4 categories of physical, priority, psychological, and philosophical, based upon location, based upon loves, the longings, and the long-term prospects that we have. So we have these goals, okay? And these goals, in order to pursue them, in order to accomplish them, takes up time. Because they don't just happen by themselves. I know we think they do. I know people who think that graduating from school will just happen by itself, because I got students that don't hand in homework. And they think that somehow by never handing in a paper and never handing in anything, it just means that you're just going to just somehow graduate when it's all said and done, and all you got to do is wait. And then they get a failing grade, and they go, Dr. Coyne, why did I fail? I'm like, well, you didn't do your homework. So? I wish I was making that up. I wish I was making that up. For about 3 years, the past 3 years that I've been teaching, and about maybe 15 to 20 classes, I have failed at least 3 students almost in every class, and because they've never handed in homework. Not a single assignment, not a single paper, and they just think I'm just here to graduate. Because I asked them what their goals are when class started. I'm just here to graduate. You're not going to graduate. You're not getting there, okay? Because goals take time, and they take work, and work doesn't happen without time, because to work, it takes time, okay? And they're like, well, I got so many different things happening in life, and you're going to have to choose amongst those. You're going to have to say yes and no to each of them from time to time. Or you're going to have to cancel something for a while. Or don't take the class if you can't do the work. And maybe you need to put that goal off for a while. I don't know. But this is how this works, okay? Because they all take time. And I know people that think that I'm gonna lose my 20 pounds. I got it. Really? Yes, I got a trick diet. What's your diet? It's called the Krispy Kreme and pickle diet. And I'm sure it's going to work. It's all takes work, and it takes time, okay? So we all have these goals. Now here's the misnomer that tends to happen within churches and within Christians. They tend to view their goals as ministry, and it's not. Okay, now playing with your kids, is that a good thing? Yes. Is it a biblical thing? Absolutely. Is it something that's a sign of a good parent? You betcha. It's still not officially ministry. Attending worship services, is that a good thing? Absolutely. Biblical thing? Sure is. Something you should definitely be doing in the signs of a good, healthy Christian? Absolutely. But it's not ministry. Okay, it's not. And so when we look at that whole list from before, you'll notice ministry was not up there. Notice that. Okay, because ministry tends to be, here's a true statement, you ready for this? What tends to be the case within American Western civilization, I do have to point that out, let somebody watches this online from Germany and yells at me, or from India or wherever and yells at me, but nonetheless, ministry for American Western civilization, ministry tends to occur in your free time. You eliminate your free time, you eliminate ministry. It doesn't happen in your life. Okay, so ministry really can only happen in your free time. And the good news is our lives are filled with free time. To which I know many people would say, no, it's not. To which I would say, well, actually, isn't it? They would say, actually, no. And I would say, yeah, you really do got lots of free time. And then you would say, I really don't. To which I would say, yeah, you do. You really do. And I know we could go back and forth forever, so allow me to play a trump card. Do you watch TV? Do you drive anywhere, or do you take a bus anywhere, or do you walk anywhere? You have free time. Because that's just what you filled it up with. You see? And so now ministry is going to happen when you are going from point A to point B. You're trying to achieve whatever goal you have, and then an interruption appears. Are you going to take that interruption? Or are you going to be angry at that interruption? Are you going to seize it as an opportunity, or are you going to reject it as an annoyance? Okay? Because that's what tends to happen whenever we get our solitude. Have you ever had it where you just had a long day and you finally get a moment to yourself and you kick back in your chair and you put your feet up and you go, oh, I can relax? It's at that moment that there's an interruption. It's because it's at that moment that you finally have a free time that God can finally say, here is a chance for you to speak grace into someone's life. And then we go, why do they have to have a problem now? Maybe someone else can deal with it. But you're the one with the free time. Okay, the problem is that we are filling up our free time with unwise things. Okay, because it's amazing how quick people will actually fill themselves up with television rather than the Bible. How amazing it is people will put digital screens and tablets and eye screens and phones in front of their faces rather than spending time with prayer. And it's amazing how, I'm not saying that listening to music or watching TV or doing stuff on your phone are bad. Not saying that it's bad at all. Just saying that it is evidence of free time. Just saying that we do have time available to minister to people, to prepare with the gospel, to pray, to learn, to grow. We do have the time. We just don't use it effectively. And then we say, but I worked a long day. Surely I deserve a rest. You sure do, with a Bible on your lap. Open with you reading it. You know, it doesn't have to be one thing or another. And so there is indeed time that is available. We just tend to view it as an interruption of what we would like to be our lazy routine. We have our routines. In fact, we could probably sit down for like a good hour. We're not going to, but really get all our routines all hammered out and find out what it is, how you wake up in the morning, what you do first, what you do second. Do you go to Meijer? Do you go to Walmart? Do you go to Sam's Club? What route do you take? Is it the same route every time? Do you walk in, say hi to the same people and keep on walking? You know, we tend to have our routines. We know where we're going, how we're getting there, and the route we're taking, and it tends to not vary very often. Okay, but what happens is that we get into this routine and we tend to daydream ourselves through it as if on autopilot, not even noticing that there could be a very valuable opportunity for ministry within the middle of that routine. That we could be so focused on our goals that we completely lose sight of God and the grace that needs to be shown. That we lose the fact that there might be somebody that needs us to stop our cart and stop it, push it to the side, sit down and pray with them. That we lose that moment to be able to say that, hey, I can go ahead and put something down and take a moment or that I'm on my way here, but I'm going to deviate from that and I'm going to stop by so-and-so that I haven't seen or heard from in a while and make sure they're okay and pray with them and speak grace into their life. That I might be able to actually take a moment and say, yes, I could watch this show. I'll start it a half hour later. I want to take a moment and I'm going to just open up the Bible and take a moment and dig into it so that I can be better prepared for ministry on the next day. And then I'll watch my NCIS or whatever. That there are those ways of being able to get engaged in preparation and the activities of ministry. We just have to seize that appropriately. So a way of looking at it is like an A to Z strategy. And that would be when an interruption hits your life, how do you approach that interruption? With annoyance or zeal? Okay, when that interruption comes, do you go, oh, for crying out loud? Or do you go, hey, an opportunity? Okay, and right there, that attitude is what's going to shape whether or not you're going to be pouring grace in the life of someone. And I'll be honest with you, it's hard, because I have my annoyance days. Ask my wife. Okay, I have my days that I look at my phone and I go, really? Really? You know, and Rachel's like, well, voicemail? Or, you know, you could like share Jesus with them and answer it. And she'll do stuff like that to me. You know, that's a sign of a good wife. You know, it really is. But man, it doesn't help my annoyance factor sometimes. I'm just like, oh, be quiet, you know. But really, that's what it's about. That's that attitude. That's that whole thing. That is ministry. So allow me then to unpack our days together. Okay, let me allow us a chance for all of us. You'll need probably go online to do this. There's going to be a lot of information all at once. This is going to be a tool for you to unclutterize your life. I'm not talking about things and places. I'm talking about unclutterizing your time. You ready for this? It's really fun. All you have to do is make yourself a list with 3 categories. Those categories are focusing on God, focusing on the people of God, and focusing on God's work in the world. And here's how this would work. focusing on God, you would write down every activity that you do that takes up time. It's all about focusing on God, whether it's prayer, Bible study, church, whatever, and include travel time in that as well. Because a lot of times people say, well, I spend this much time on this activity, this on this activity, and they add up all the time saying, gee, I got a couple hours free here. Why don't seem to have those couple of hours when my day actually happens? Because you didn't account for the car and the travel. Okay, you didn't account for that. So if you come to church, which you guys obviously did, nobody lives here in this building, that means you traveled here. So include that time in that so that you have an accurate amount. So focusing on God, focusing on the people of God, that would not just mean the people in the church, but any person ever, anywhere. Okay, so it's family, friends, relatives, siblings, extended family. It would be people in the church, people that you're caring for, neighbors, whomever, people that you spend time with, and write out what you do and make a very exhaustive list, as well as how much time in a given month you spend on that activity. Okay, so for some people, if it's daily, you might have to do out the days and figure out your weeks and times it by 4. If it's like a person you only see maybe once or twice a month, then figure that out, how much time that is, and write that down. But try to work your best on a weekly or monthly scale. And then focusing on God's work in the world. That would be whatever you're doing regarding shopping, cleaning, chores, landscaping, whatever, any other things in life that's not directly involving necessarily people. Your job would fit in that. Even though your job includes people, your job is a work in the world, and that God wants certain things to take place in the world, and he wants certain things to be creative and certain things to be made. Your job does that. So your job is part of God's work in the world. And so that would kind of fall into that category. If you're someone that does an active ministry, whether it's a nursing home ministry or whatever, you can put that either on focusing on the people of God or God's work in the world. It goes in either category. Congratulations. Just don't put it in both, because then you're counting it twice, and you don't need to do that because your time is valuable. Okay, and what good does it do to count the same $10 bill twice when you go to the bank for a deposit? Okay, it doesn't mean you have $10 extra. You just counted the same bill twice. Congratulations. And you don't want to do that because it throws everything off. So pick one. What if I put in the wrong category? It doesn't matter, the category. Just put it on the list once and it's fine. I'm just helping you organize it, okay? So don't be, hyper OCD about it, okay? And then you get to go through each item on your list that you write when you're all done with your list. Told you it's involved. And you're going to rate each item between a 1, 2, a 3, or a 4. And it looks like this. 1 is an absolutely non-negotiable. It must absolutely be a top dog priority. And that would be like going to your job. That would be like sleeping. And by the way, focusing on God's work in the world or focusing on the people of God, include yourself in that, because you are of the people of God. So your sleep, your hygiene, your shower time, your getting dressed time, your whatever, going to the doctor time, whatever is involved in that, that's you. So write down those as well. Okay, so that's a part of you. And sleep, by the way, would fit in kind of that absolute non-negotiable thing, don't you think? Okay, so there are certain things you would label a 1. Some things would be a 2, which is a very important activity. It's not an absolute, but its importance is super high. Okay, so that would be a 2. A 3 would be something that is good to do whenever possible. Good to do when possible. Stuff like watching television. That's a great thing to do whenever possible. Sometimes it's not possible, so you don't watch it. But boy, it's a good thing to do whenever possible. And so you can figure out whatever those activities are. Then there's 4, which are clearly optional. Okay, which you could put TV at, depending on how invested you are with your show. Okay, it really depends on the person. But 4 is something that's clearly optional. Okay, clearly optional. And again, here's where we could put television at, or we could put going golfing, or we could put whatever. Okay, it just doesn't matter. But so you would rate every single item. Now, here's what you're next going to do. Ready for this? How much time is then devoted to each activity in a 4-week, 28-day period? And the reason why it's 4-week, 28-day and not 30 or 31 is because 1 week is 7 days, and 7 times 4 is 28, okay? So we're just doing simple math. That's all it is. We're not doing algorithms and statistics, okay? Simple math. So we know that we have to figure out how much time is devoted to each activity in a 4-week, 28-day period. So once you have all that figured out, you then get to, and here's an example, like if you work 40 hours a week, 40 times 4 is 160 hours in a month, but don't forget to add travel time in addition to that. How long it take you to get to work, how long it take you to get home. Okay, so once you have all that done, that's an example for you. I told you, it's be a little technical. It's a great resource. It's a lot of work. It's worth it. Okay, trust me, this is going to be really, really worth it. Okay, so once you get everything all figured out, you then add up all the total hours that you say that you're needing. Okay, so once you get done with your list and you add up all the hours, and I guarantee that at the end, your list is going to be higher than the number of hours there actually are in a 28-day period. Okay, so once you're all done, the question will be, does your hours exceed 672? Because 672 is how many hours there are in 28 days. Okay, so if your number does exceed 672, and I've done conferences, by the way, doing this, and I've done lecture series doing this, taking people through this, where I actually give them time, take an hour, go ahead and fill it out. We'll meet together after an hour, take a lunch, whatever, and people will come back, and we do this for real, we lay it all out. Okay, and every time, 100% of the people have come back anywhere between 750 and 900 hours. And what happens is that they are committed to all these things, but not all of it gets done, which means things are not getting done, which means they are losing integrity because they are committed their word to getting something done and aren't doing it. And then and whenever you have too many conflicts and you don't choose which ones to do and which one to avoid, to not do, it gets chosen for you, usually in the worst way possible. Where next thing you know, you've totally failed something. You've totally let someone down. You said you'd pray for them, but you didn't. You said you'd be there for them, and you weren't. And they end up having a loved one die, and they're by themselves. And whatever the case is, because you just couldn't get your life together. So this is very, very important. So once you find out that your hours exceed 672, which probably will be the case, okay, then you need to start looking at all your fours and stop doing them. Start cutting them out of your life. And if that means calling up someone saying, hey, I'm going to have to drop out of this group, or I'm not going to have to be part of this group for a while, then that's what that means. And so you start cutting out fours until it's under 672. Oh, but Pastor Coyne, what if I get rid of all my fours, or I don't have any fours, or when I get rid of all my fours, I'm still over 672? Well, I'm really glad you asked that. Then you start cutting out your threes. Okay, well, what if I cut out my threes, and then I still am over 600? Well, do you see where this is going? You start cutting out your twos. Okay, and usually what happens is if you're getting out into your twos, it means that you label things a 1 and 2 that didn't belong to be a 1 or a 2. It's usually what that means, and it's really time to start reevaluating. Because I've seen people come up to me and say, oh, my whole thing's a 1. And I go, yeah, no, it's not. Start over. Okay, you need to be serious about this. This is not a time to try to make an excuse not to make changes. If you want to be a faithful person who can really do ministry and have time to really share the grace of God in the lives of people, you need to be serious. And that means actually making sacrifices. That's what's necessary to be. Jesus said, if you want to follow me, take up your cross. And that does not mean we walk around with a piece of wood around our necks. That means that we sacrifice ourselves and the things that we appreciate, if that means getting the kingdom of God to flourish in the name of God and for his honor and glory. Okay? And so here's the thing. I had asked at the beginning, don't you wish we had more hours in a day? And all of us were like, yes, I wish we had more hours in the day. Well, who gave us 24 hours? God did. So then to say that I wish we had more hours in the day is like being like Adam saying, God, the day you gave me was too short. Or, God, you screwed up. You didn't give me enough time. And is that the case? No. So the person who says, man, I wish I had more hours in the day is a person that's also saying, I'm putting the blame on God because he didn't give me 26 hours. He didn't give me 30. He only gave me 24. But God in his providence gave us 24. And rather than blaming God, maybe we ought to start blaming ourselves and say, man, I'm trying to fit too much in a day. And it's time to start saying no, so I can be a person of integrity and a person of faithfulness. Because otherwise, if I'm going to be all about my goals, what's going to get lost is God and grace. God will not be center of my life, and grace will not be shown in my life. Because when we get too stressed out, those are the first two things to go. Let's have a closing word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, I fear that we have become an unfaithful generation. I fear, Lord, that we have become an unfaithful people. I fear, Lord, that we have, because of our prioritizing inappropriately, because of our fears and our ambitions, that, Lord, we have, in a sense, made you look small by focusing just on our problems. And, Lord, I ask that you would become greater than all of that within our lives. Lord, that you would be the one that would be that central fulcrum in our life, Lord, that you would be the one that our lives hinge upon. And Lord, may we become people of an integrity, people of honesty, people of sincerity, people, Lord, that are so devoted to you, that you are first and foremost, and that your people are second. And Lord, may we never let our purposes and plans overtrump your praise and your people. And Lord, may we prioritize appropriately. May we have the wisdom to see that you desire to reach others. May we, with that wisdom, reach those you desire, rather than just trying to reach our own goals. May we, Lord, have the courage to be your hands and feet, rather than being paralyzed with fear that a goal might not be reached. And may your Spirit and your gospel speed ahead of us, that it may be received, you may be received and honored. This I pray in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.